Bridge of Spies. Wow, a Cold War thriller directed by Steven Spielberg, starring Tom Hanks, and kind of written by the Coen brothers? Is it a really good movie? Yes? In 1957, Rudolph Abel, played by Mark Rylance, receives a secret message from a park bench minutes before the FBI bursts into his Brooklyn apartment and arrests him on suspicion of being a Soviet spy. Side note, apparently if you want your movie in 2015 to be nominated for an Oscar, set it in 1950s New York. An insurance lawyer named James Donovan, played by Tom Hanks, is asked to defend Abel in U.S. courts. No one expects Donovan to give Abel a strong defense, but they at least want to give him a trial, so that the Soviets can't use his arrest as propaganda in the Cold War. However, Donovan takes his work very seriously, believing everyone deserves a fair trial, and seeks an acquittal of Abel, causing outrage from the American public, and hate mail and death threats to be levied against Donovan. The situation is further complicated when a U-2 spy plane is shot down over the Soviet Union, and the American pilot, Francis Gary Powers, is captured. Donovan is then called upon to help negotiate a prisoner exchange. Abel for Powers. When Oscar nominations were announced on January 14th, I had seen 6 of 8 Best Picture nominees, plus Carol and Inside Out and Creed and The Danish Girl and Steve Jobs and a few others that were flirting with the Best Picture nomination, he added defensively. So when the 8 nominees were announced, I opened a Word document, gave each movie its own heading, and then just started compiling my thoughts on each one, with the intention of eventually organizing those thoughts into a review. But I hit a snag with Bridge of Spies. I had seen it in mid-November, and then 2 months later, in mid-January, I didn't really recall specifics about it that I could put into a review. I remember liking it and thinking it was well made. It is Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks after all, but it clearly didn't leave much of an impression on me, even just 2 months later. I think that is very emblematic of Spielberg's work for the last 10 years or so. None of his movies have been bad by any means. I'd say they've ranged from pretty good to very good, but there's just no teeth to them. They're very solid, but ultimately safe and forgettable movies. And I of course have to point out that Spielberg's movies are graded on a curve that he himself created. If anyone else had made War Horse, Lincoln, and Bridge of Spies over the course of 4 years, I would commend them and think they were a great filmmaker. But with Spielberg, I kind of have to shrug and say, not his best. And understandably so. Some of his movies have literally changed the cultural landscape, and he is inarguably one of the best directors of all time. So of course I'm going to look at Bridge of Spies and shrug. For this reason, I kind of worry about Spielberg's legacy in the eyes of the younger generation. I realize that makes me sound a lot older than I am, but seriously. Once Spielberg is done making movies, he'll be remembered for the groundbreaking stuff, like Jaws and Raiders and Schindler's List. But for the time being, current high schoolers and college kids are too young to remember Saving Private Ryan and Catch Me If You Can and Minority Report or even War of the Worlds. So to them, Spielberg is just that director who makes movies that old white people love. I digress. The point is, Bridge of Spies is a fine movie. It's just not changing the cultural landscape. But it's a fine movie. The first half is devoted to Donovan defending Abel in the criminal trial, where no one except Donovan wants Abel to get a fair trial. Most of the American people treat Donovan as a traitor as well, simply for defending Abel. And so Donovan finds himself defending not just Abel, but also the integrity of the American justice system, where everyone is entitled to representation and a fair trial. There's nothing really groundbreaking here. It's your typical hero stands up for what's right in the face of adversity story. But at the same time, it also kind of subverts the Cold War movie formula because it makes the American people the bad guy as much as the Soviets. The second half of the movie takes a dramatic turn into a prisoner exchange, high-stakes negotiation story. Again, it's compelling, it's wonderfully acted and beautifully shot, it's well-crafted tension, and yet it just doesn't have much teeth to it. I acknowledge I'm being a bit unfair, but I also think Bridge of Spies may have gotten an obligatory Best Picture nomination just because it's Hanks and Spielberg, when there are other movies that had more to them. If you like the movies Spielberg has made the past few years, or if you're interested in American history and the Cold War, then you'll probably really love Bridge of Spies. Beyond that, it's still definitely a good movie. At worst, it's perfectly serviceable. But I just think Bridge of Spies will ultimately go the way of Chocolat and The Hours and Finding Neverland and The Reader, where years later people will look back and say, oh, that was nominated for Best Picture? Huh. Need to catch up on all the Oscar-nominated movies? Watch them with movies on demand from the comfort of your home through your local cable provider. Go to rentmoviesondemand.com for more information. And while you're at it, you can win free movies on demand if you can predict the Oscars. Go to mod.moviesondemandpool.com and use the pool login information in the description below to join my personal Oscar prediction pool. But to win, you have to beat me. Good luck and happy Oscar season.